It's an open-ended approach that leaves substantial ground for variation or complete renegotiation of prior commitments. Goes back to just what you mentioned. Let's say 5 years into the project, they find that that performance spec was ridiculous. It just, you know, the room's not used anymore for a lecture room, so why are we, you know, so the thing is that you have to be very open-ended to come back and renegotiate on some of these points. Negotiation is by far the most commonly used approach to dispute resolution and the most effective in terms of cost, use of resources, speed of resolution, etc. So negotiated settlement is really fundamental to this, because you're correct, in the period of 30 years, there's an awful lot changes. That hospital may not quite look the way it was 20 years down the line. It may be used differently, etc. You know, an example would be in the hospital I was involved in, the fastest growing segment was renal dialysis. It was out of control, simply because people were aging. And so, if you take our demographics, you know that 20 years from now, there's going to be a lot more hip and joint replacements and a lot more renal analysis than what you have today. So you're going to have to be able to deal with elderly people coming into a hospital. Or you may have to deal with remote. You may say in renal analysis, look, we can't have all these people in the hospital. We've got to convert that space to a telecommunications center where we can do it remotely.
James, again, a negotiation. Is it sent to a mediator or sent to arbitration?
There's a whole, in the master agreement, I didn't bring it in here, but there's about 10 different things that you go through. So if it can't be done by negotiation, it then goes to another level. The last is really where you have to go into a arbitration. But no one wants that, really. Sorry, did you?
Yeah. Do the master agreements also cover like contracts for that? You know, is it just between the bidder and the government, or is it everybody else that's involved?
Only two. There's two parties to the agreement, the two partners. Then the developer has what we call the drop-down agreements, the design build and the operation maintenance agreement. And then agreements with all the lenders. And I'll show you that, but yeah, there's only two parties to the master agreement.
And Jim, is that a public document? Can we access it online, or do we have to go through?
I don't think the master agreement, that's a good question. Like yourself, most countries have Freedom of Information Acts. And I think what you would get if you applied would be, I guess in your terms, a redacted copy. So what you would probably get is a copy that took out any commercially confidential information.
But it would be the one that was sent out to bid.
Well, look at it is public, because when you go to bid, you get a copy of the last one.
Right.
So it's probably, now, I'll show you I'll show you a photograph of just the legal agreements. You know, I mean, they say you need a dump truck to carry all these things.
Do you have a copy that you can make available to us, or should we go through?
I don't have a copy. I could give you a contact. You know, these are legal agreements, so I wouldn't know, but I'm sure I could give you a contact. You could see if you could get hold of one.
Yeah, I'm thinking that AIA contracts that we deal with here in design build or not.
Well, that's a drop-down contract. You won't get that because that's between the developer and the builder.
Right.
So that would be a different that would be strictly a commercially
Yeah. I'm just saying, I kind of thought that it might be like that. I'm not saying it is.
Yeah.
I don't know. This is what's between the government and the SBB, correct?
Yeah, that's
Right.
what you call your master agreement.
Right,
And then behind that are maybe 15 or 20 other agreements.
Okay.
And I would suspect the design build agreement, again, is pretty standardized, because what we find is the developer on one project may use Clark Construction on one project, and then on the next project, Clark is bidding with another person. So there's not really any secrets in that. The contractors who are going to build, design build, you know, they want to know that all of these projects don't have any surprises. The question always is, you know, are they willing to build it for this amount of money? That's, and of this time.
Just get the name.
So here's the way it works. These are the services that are going to be delivered. You have an output spec on what these services are. The government, I mean, the difficulty for government in this project is they have to start up front telling you what it is they want. And that's a big challenge for government. They usually, as you say, Dan, they usually say, start the building and then we'll be able to tell you more. And a classic one is in dealing with medical facilities where the doctors say, well, if I'm not going to be in the building 5 years from now, I'm not going to tell you what machinery I need. I don't know what I need. So typically they would build a facility and then they'd have to knock down walls because the doctor ordered this CAT scan machine that they can't get in the building. And that goes all the way down the line, whether it's in, you know, a good one would be transportation. Let's say the government has to decide toll collection. Well, we haven't made up our minds whether we're going to have toll booths or we're going to have automatic. Well, make up your mind, because are you going to have toll booths or are you going to do it with, you know, an electronic toll system? Well, we're not sure. Well, how can I bid? So it goes all the way down the line that they have to say that cars should not, at any point, entering, exiting, cars should not be have to slow down more than, you know, below this speed limit, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so they have to design what the ramp speeds and on speeds and how, but they have to tell you what the output specification, that no ramp should be more than 4%. Yeah.
Well, I mean, output specifications, is that a big public debate? I mean, clearly, what does the public want, right?
Yeah.
So is one agency involved, or they take it out and they bring in and they have hearings and town halls and votes and...
They could, yeah. I mean, depending upon...
What actually happens in Canada?
Well, in our case, you know, in the hospital, the output spec was done by a consultant who came in and talked to everybody. And then piled it into a huge document. I guess if you're doing a highway, the output spec, there would have to be, let me say, there would have to be community engagement, or what we call stakeholder engagement for certain projects. A good one would be highway. You're going to have to talk to the neighbors. You know, we had a big fight over the airport link. It was to go from downtown to the airport. But a lot of the community said, yeah, but I want a station in my locale. Why? Well, because I can get to work. And they said, but the line isn't. I mean, there's a point that if we keep adding stations, it'll slow down the line and it's serving the wrong people. So you get this stakeholder engagement. You're correct.
Well, the highway they're doing, I think south of Richmond, and it's like 65 miles. And interstate highway specification, but they're having 7 cloverleaf on it. And they're figuring, they're capturing all their value in their cloverleaf. But an output specification, that seems pretty private sector oriented deal.
Yeah.
So, I guess in my mind, who decides how many cloverleaf to put on?
Public sector. The developer says, you tell me what you want, and I'll do it. But don't get me involved in deciding whether it's 5 or 7. I don't have that expertise. Nor am I going to go to public meetings and speak on your behalf. That's a, quote, that's a political decision, essentially. So the output, you're correct. I mean, this could be very controversial in some cases. Then you also have to design the system by which you measure performance. And you have to design a payment mechanism by which you reward or penalize based on this and this. So in this, what I call the realization phase, you've now got to deal with these 3 things. So this is public. Essentially, you know, the payment mechanism has public and private, and then these performance measures are generally done by the public sector, because they're the ones specifying performance. So they're the people that are going to say, okay, here's a performance measure for a jail. You can't have more than 2 prisoners escape every month. Right? Some of them are difficult, because take a case of a jail. The government says, oh, here's the performance measure. We're going to judge the performance of the jail based on the rates of recommitting crimes after they get out. You say, just a minute. Like, how am I going to control? You know, I can design a nice prison, but I can't control how many people recommit a crime. I can only deal with what happens within the confines. So you can imagine the debates you get into in terms of how you actually measure. And it's got to be quantifiable. So there is, you can see that once it's built, I mean, design build is a kind of a piece of cake. I mean, people do that. But when you get into contract management,